Hey guys, Paul here. So today I wanted to talk about getting better at Yu-Gi-Oh! And some of the common pitfalls or misconceptions that I sort of see some players make in regards to it. This is all my opinion, of course, so you're free to disagree, but I have played this game for a really long time. I've introduced this game to a lot of people, helped some people get better, and seen reasonable amounts of success myself. And trust me when I say that getting better at Yu-Gi-Oh! Can happen in a lot of different ways. Different people learn games differently, but I think that it is something that everybody sort of universally wants to do. Whether you're casual or competitive, it's still just, good to know more about the game, know more about how it works, even if it's only for the sake of, beating your friends around the kitchen table or doing a little better at locals than you did last week, or all the way up to like, topping a regional, topping a YCS, winning a national tournament of some kind. Everybody wants to know a little bit more about Yu-Gi-Oh! So when I say that there are pitfalls, I mean that I think not everybody approaches, getting better in the same way, of course, but sometimes people will complain about Yu-Gi-Oh! Or, sort of feel like they've reached a plateau, and I think that there's sometimes more steps that you can take to change that and do better. So the first really, really, really important thing that I hear from a lot of players is complaining about cards or complaining about losses without really understanding like how they happened or what you could have done differently. And so like I think what makes this tough with Yu-Gi-Oh is the fact that there are so many ways that you can lose a game of Yu-Gi-Oh. Sometimes it's the last card that was played that just sort of lost you the entire game. Oh, they top decked Harpy's Feather Duster, destroyed all my back row, and it's like there's something I could do. I just had, I'm playing a trap deck, right? Or maybe they just shifted me, right, on turn one, or maxied me if it's like maybe Master Duel or whatever, and like there's just nothing I could do, and I lost. And then there's like a bunch of other things too. Sometimes people have like actual outs, like an Underworld Goddess play where they like took your best monster or a kaiju or something like that. Maybe they played one of those like really strong board breakers, Dark Ruler No More, well-timed droplets. Maybe the deck is just a bad matchup. But no matter how you spin it, I think that it's important to take your losses, take them on the chin and remember that like sometimes the last card that was played was not actually the card that beat you. Sometimes it looks like, oh, well, when they played that one Ash against that thing, then I just automatically lost because my deck can't play through Ash. But my sort of philosophy with Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been that it's not really worth complaining about cards for like very long. So if you lose to Shifter, or you lose to Max C, or you lose to Super Poly, or something like that, yeah, you can vent about it a little bit afterwards. These cards are sacky, they are unfun to lose against. But then I kind of want to go like immediately back to the lab and think, okay, when Max C is played, what can my deck do? It might not be much, but what can my deck do under Dimension Shifter? What can my deck do under a certain floodgate that beat me? Or what are my deck's outs to certain problematic boss monsters? Is there any way I can swing over this thing that's 4,000 attack? Is there any other way that I can out it? Do I have an Underworld Goddess in my extra deck? Does it come down to, like using something like that? Are there any exchanges early in the game that can maybe make a certain matchup a little bit easier? Because, just without going into any more detail on it, there's just lots of matchups that are kind of swingy, right? Some decks beat certain other decks. Like there's like a random, Goblin Biker does well against Pearly, for instance. It's like weird, but they can remove the materials and it doesn't affect, stuff like that. But like always ask yourself, is there more that I can do before the like blowout card comes into the equation? Or when that card is played, is there anything I can do? You'd be surprised how many decks can actually live through a shifter turn and keep playing. Remember, when your opponent plays a card like Dimension Shifter, they are losing a card out of their hand. They might be slightly more limited in the amount of plays that they can make. So for instance, I play the Vanquish Soul deck. So speaking from experience, it is a deck that can pretty easily run Dimension Shifter, but it's not actually perfect. Like if I use Dimension Shifter, then it kind of means I don't really get to link summon into my Rock of the Vanquisher and then recover one of my cards from the graveyard all the way until the next turn. So like even though Dimension Shifter kind of helped to shut down a certain deck, it means that my strategies aren't working entirely perfectly as intended either. And so there's like a little bit more nuance to it. And sometimes if certain decks don't just give up against Vanquish Soul, I'm talking maybe some of my Master Duel experiences here, they might find that like my deck is a little bit further behind on board development, and so like there can still be a game there. Another thing with Max C2 is I always ask myself, okay, what can I make within like just 2 or 3 summons? If I have to give my opponent a couple cards from Max C, what's the most defensive thing I can make? Is there like a trap that I can search to end my combo early and maybe just set that? Can I just make some better use of, something else that's in my hand that I can just set and like play with that? Yeah, so just always remember when you're losing to look at every card critically and think like, is there a best case scenario here that I can hope for? It's not just necessarily that like Nibiru destroys your deck. What can your deck do in 4 summons? I know a lot of people say, oh, well, the best decks can just make Apollosa or Phantom Yubel or, whatever good cards negate or they can recover from it. But what can your deck do after Nibiru? Is there anything you can do with the Primal Being token? Is there anything you can do with 4 summons? So on and so forth. Okay, the next thing is let games play out. This is something I've caught a little bit of flack for from videos in the past, but I really am a very strong proponent, at least when you are trying to learn or play test, to really let games breathe. Even if it looks like you're losing, even if it seems like, okay, well, like they've just negated this last thing, or they have this board I'm not going to be able to break, try to let the game play out. I think this is important both for learning yourself and also for keeping your opponent a little bit honest. I will say that like I get that some people are just playing Yu-Gi-Oh! To relax, right? They have a limited amount of time and they just want to maybe hop on Master Duel and get a few games in, or they're just kind of like going to locals and trying to enjoy themselves. I get it. Not everybody's like, trying to learn every nook and cranny of the game. But I think that if you are trying to improve, it's really important to let games play out because you never know when your opponent might fumble something. You never know when you might have forgotten that there's actually some protection effect on your field. Like, oh, this monster actually, oh yeah, this one can't be destroyed by battle because of that one effect. And you thought that you'd lost, but actually your opponent couldn't, OTK you there. Maybe you did use Imperm earlier and that column is still turned off, but you gave up and then your opponent was literally about to play the card in the column and then like that would have negated their spell. And so I say this not because you'll always win every game that you stick with. Trust me, there are plenty of hopeless Yu-Gi-Oh games. It's a lot like with the Maxi and Shifter example. There are times when those cards will just shut you down. That's all you can do. Like, you lose. But still, I think it's important to make sure that your opponent has to take those necessary steps in order to beat you rather than you just handing it to them. You'd be surprised. Sometimes you can win a few more games that way, and even the games that you lose, you might just learn more about their deck, learn more about a certain interaction. The time that you spend kind of like thinking on it while it's playing out might actually remind you of like, oh, I could have done that, darn, So that's kind of an important one. And then the last thing that I wanted to cover in this video, unless I think of something suddenly at the end, is making sure that, and this one's hard to put into words, but making sure that you learn for yourself why certain cards are good or bad. So something that I see a lot on online discourse is people talking about a certain deck sucking, or a certain archetype is bad, or a certain card in a certain archetype is bad. And I've made a video about this fairly recently, but the crucial thing I think for me when I was like getting better at Yu-Gi-Oh! And all of that myself was like, I want to not just take people's word for it that a card is bad. I want to play the card and learn myself that it's bad. I want to play it in a lot of duels and like, try to make it work and then lose with it, right? So that might sound weird, but just a quick example is recently I've been playing Voiceless Voice. And Voiceless Voice usually does not run the new Saphira Ritual Monster. It's not really very like conducive to how the game is played today. It's kind of got a neat battle phase effect, but the fact that it doesn't have the negation and the searching and stuff that like Skull Guardian has, and also just doesn't have great stats, means that it's usually not worth it. And when I was first playing Voiceless Voice, I included Saphira anyway, because it is a Voiceless Voice card. I want to play it and learn everything about it. See any scenarios where it could be useful, any times that it could, help me secure a victory. And a lot of people at the time told me like, no, you're supposed to take that out. No one runs it, it's bad, take it out. But I'm like, okay, I don't mind taking it out, but I'll take it out once I learn for myself from experience that the card isn't really helping me or isn't really worth it. So I played Voiceless Voice a lot. I played many games in real life and also a lot on Master Duel. And there were some games where Saphira helped me win or helped to sort of advance my board state. I ultimately ended up taking the card out. So you might be thinking, okay, well, what's the difference? You could have saved yourself a lot of time and headache by just taking it out and listening to people. The thing is, though, by learning for myself that the card was bad, I think that I now have a better understanding of A, why it's bad specifically, not just, oh, it's awful because people say so, and B, the situations where it can be good. If I wanted to play it, I could take people off guard with a card like that. Some other things that I cited in that video recently about like, not telling people how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, I'm one of those people who likes to play trap cards that different archetypes get. So in Rescue Ace, I like to play the card Reinforce, which is not commonly run. Sometimes I will mess around with, the weird offbeat Vanquish Soul cards that people don't play, and, that applies to just many of the decks that I've played. So like sometimes they're not worth it, sometimes they're not good, but sometimes they are. They can either catch somebody off guard, or they have some recycling capability, or they just kind of fill a void that the deck currently has. And even if you maybe don't end up using them at the competitive regional tournament event, you still can know more about how the archetype works, and it can even maybe illuminate you on something like that the archetype is trying to do in general, absent of said card, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, just some things to keep in mind. That's pretty much, the gist of what I wanted to say. If I'm trying to think of any, like, tidbits. Another thing, too, whenever you're playtesting, I know sometimes, like, a common thing I notice when people playtest is that they'll be like, okay, guys, I'm going to the shop to playtest. I'm trying out this new build. And they'll play a couple of games, like 2 or maybe 3 games, and immediately decide that, oh, okay, this card sucks. Like, I'm taking it out because they lost and they're kind of salty and they're kind of bitter and they don't want to lose. But I think for me, it's sort of similar to that last thing where I want to play many games before I really make any judgment call about a specific deck build or a card's performance. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it in YCS terms, your card needs to be performing over the course of 10 or 12 rounds, not just because it like underperformed or bricked once in one matchup when you just happen to be playing with your friend. So, make sure that you kind of take at least for me, I always say, take a bit of a statistical approach, right? Maybe a card underperforms the first time that you play it ever, but over the course of 10, 20, 30 games, it might actually end up evening out or overperforming, and it just was like a bad first impression. Just things like that. Always making sure that you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Honestly, learning for yourself, making the most of these wins, losses, experience, things like that. So yeah, hopefully that was just a helpful or useful video. I don't normally make these kinds of things, and I realized that some of my advice was pretty abstract, so it'd be better to go in with like concrete examples. But I think that with Yu-Gi-Oh! It's tough because matchups are so specific and nuanced. So like, I don't want to give any single card, you must use this card in this one way, because like it just totally changes from deck to deck. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Like I said before, I am trying to get away from just making the complain about Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos, like, oh, Yu-Gi-Oh's dying, this is so sad, this is so bad, and here's how the game's been ruined. And instead, just talk about things that I like, or ways that you can get better, different ways you can approach the game. So if you like that, then I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, and yeah, cool, great. All right, I've gone on for a while, so I will see you guys in the next one. Fast turn.